Assassin's Creed is a franchise that has been around for a very long time, and there have been many different characters throughout the franchise. Assassin's Creed has had its ups and downs, but one thing I've been thinking of is about some of the least liked characters, and I'm talking about Connor Kenway and Arno Dorian. Connor is cited as a bad character in a good game, and Arno is cited as a good character in a bad game. But believe me, there are worse characters, but the reason why Connor and Arno are so polarizing is because they were around when the franchise was still good. But a lot of people blame Connor for being a boring character and Arno for being more of the same, a rather flawed character. But then I was thinking, what if Connor and Arno were both in the same game? After doing a bit of research, it appears that Connor and Arno would be a match made in heaven. A lot of people would love to see both characters redeem themselves, and personally, I feel that a redemption arc is really in order. I'm sure that a lot of us would love to see a more mature Connor and Arno, of where they have learned from their mistakes. They are both from two very different places, but Connor has very strong ties to Europe because his father and grandfather are from England, so it would make so much sense that Connor would want to investigate his British ties and look into where his family comes from. And seeing as Arno is a high-ranking assassin in Europe, it would only make sense that their paths would cross. I looked into it, and both characters finished their stories when they were both still fairly young men, and they are not that far apart in age, about a 12-year age gap, and that is not a lot considering that their stories happen almost parallel to each other, because Assassin's Creed Rogue mentions both of them. Or let me rather say that it references both of them, because you see Arno before you kill his father, and Arno's father says that Connor dismantled the Templar influence after Shay left to come to France. Just imagine that. Connor and Arno side by side. Imagine if instead of making Assassin's Creed Syndicate, they made a duo game with Connor and Arno. And by the way, the only reason I'm saying their names in that order is because it's the order of the games. If I had to say it alphabetically, then of course, Arno would be first. But for the context of this video, I'll be referring to them in that order. I'd imagine that their outfits and appearances would have changed, maybe with them both sporting more facial and longer hair. I would imagine that Connor would still be representing his Native American heritage, but would most likely get a new outfit in Europe to stay hidden. Most likely something more like Arno's outfit, and I'm sure that they would get along really well together. Now that I think about it, Connor and Arno have lost so much and have a good amount of similarities. They both lost both parents at a very young age, and it shaped who they were, so if they would ever cross paths, I am sure that they would get along well. They would maybe even become good friends, and it would make a lot of sense if Arno heard about Connor somewhere. But they would also need a mutual threat that would bring their paths together, which a lot of people want to be Shay Cormac. A lot of people want a game like that, where Connor and Arno hunt down Shay Cormac, and a good reason is because Shay Cormac killed Arno's father, which basically set Arno on his assassin path, which is good, but I feel that they didn't give him his revenge plot. It's weird that Arno didn't want to get revenge on the person who killed his father. The problem with that is how Arno finding his father's killer was completely omitted for some reason. They chose to not make that the narrative of Assassin's Creed Unity, and they did it for a silly reason, basically stating that because it happened a long time ago, he just simply forgot about it, which is rather insulting seeing as how a lot of other assassins sought out the killers of their family, and the writing of Assassin's Creed Unity doesn't really get any better the more you look into it, and I'm assuming that maybe it was because the game was rushed and that they didn't have time to do as much writing as they would have liked, and I'm sure that Assassin's Creed Unity had a lot of cut content that would have fleshed things out. I wish that Connor would have gotten a proper follow-up DLC, one that takes him to Europe in the pursuit to discover more about his father and grandfather. Connor has heavy ties to London because of them, so it would only be natural for him to have an interest in seeing where he comes from. But based on the lore, a lot of those ties were basically written off to where everything was taken over by the Templars, so then that leaves no reason for Connor to have any interest in discovering more about his father's side. But as we do know, the Kenway Manor was featured in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, so yeah, that is a plot hole filled, I guess. Connor Kenway and Arno Dorian are very well respected characters in the Assassin's Creed community, but they didn't get the respect they deserved, and they didn't get any legacy. Connor got somewhat of a legacy with Assassin's Creed 3 and the Homestead missions, which to my understanding not enough people played, so they never got to see the real side of him, as a more mature, loving person who cares about the well-being and safety of innocent people, just like Shay Cormac did. And I know that's crazy to say, but it's the truth. And the problem with Arno is that he didn't get a legacy. His story starts with him and ends with him. It doesn't leave much left after, because it appears that Arno is almost never mentioned again in any of the Assassin's Creed games that came after Unity. And Syndicate pretty much erased him, because even way before the events of Assassin's Creed Syndicate, he was already in his 40s. By the time that Syndicate took place, he was probably a very old man, or most likely died of old age. I'm sure that a lot of the things I said just boiled down to poor management from Ubisoft. The writers either didn't have enough time, or maybe didn't do a good enough job to flesh out the characters in the video, because I made a video about them called The Failed Master Assassins, of where I talk about the fact that we would have loved to see more games about Connor and Arno, but instead they just decided to erase everything and move on. I'm sure that one could probably find mentions of the final days of Connor and Arno in the Assassin's Creed comic books, but that is not a sure thing. I haven't had many run-ins with Assassin's Creed comic books or all the written media about Assassin's Creed, because a lot of it is rare and hard to come by physically. But I'm sure that you can find some stuff online. But with that, this is the Chilly Man signing off. I thank everyone for watching. Peace out.